Why would somebody invest in a franchise? You might be surprised to hear this, but over 10% of the businesses in the United States are actually franchises. With that many franchises, clearly there's something going on there. But is it all good? Mostly good? Or they're there because there's no alternative? We've definitely looked at a number of franchises over the years, and we're starting to take a harder look at them. In today's video, I'll talk about the bad parts, the good parts, and what our experience has been. To get to this point, we have looked at a lot of companies over the years. After having looked at thousands of companies over the years, you start to develop an ability to more quickly assess whether or not it might be a company that you want to eventually purchase. I would like to say that we have this real fancy evaluation process and you put in all the information and it pops out a yes or no at the end. What I have found, the company, the industry, et cetera, it's important, but at the end of the day, it's the people. And I firmly believe that. It's very similar to what a lot of investors in venture capital would say. You have the product, you have the market, whatever, but at the end of the day, it's the people. Unfortunately, it's really hard to evaluate people and whatnot. You really just, got to go with your gut. I'm not infallible in my ability to do so. However, I will say on the deals that we have been most excited and ultimately have been most successful, it's not necessarily because our analysis going into the deal was right or wrong, or even our assessment of the people was right or wrong. The companies that are successful currently have great people. It's as simple as that. In thinking about whether or not to buy a franchise, a lot of factors to look at. Over time, I've gotten a feel for, in my view, what are some of the bad parts and what are some of the good parts. In terms of the bad parts, there's one more boss. If you think about a normal business, you have customers, suppliers, vendors, maybe regulatory authorities or whatever, and all of those are going to compete for your time, for your resources. Generally speaking, they're all easy to work with, and that's great. Regardless, when working with a franchisee, you have to put one more place at the table, and even though that relationship might be good most of the time, from time to time, it's going to be a challenge. And that's why I would say that that's one of the bad aspects of buying into a franchise. The other component that is perhaps the biggest negative is that, a lot of times the incentive structure for the franchisor is misaligned with the incentive structure for the franchisee. What I mean by that is, oftentimes the royalty mechanism for the franchisor is based off of revenues at the franchisee level. That seems fair. That incentivizes the franchisor to focus on revenues, whereas at the franchisee level, sure, you have to care about revenues, but more so than revenues, you have to care about profitability. The franchisor can do things that improve the franchisor's revenues and ultimately profits, but hurt the franchisee's profits. A great example of this is couponing. Now, couponing sounds good at the surface level because it increases revenues and whatnot and maybe brings new people to the store.
Coupons are genius!
But it's really mostly good in a lot of cases for the franchisor. At the franchisee level, sure, you're getting some new people into the store and you're increasing your revenues, but depending on how aggressive the coupon is, you might have increased revenues with break-even profits for that customer. And the argument that you're getting new people into the store, yeah, that could be good, but what if this customer is only going to come into the store when they have a coupon? Is that really a high value customer? I would make the argument no. That's just one example of why the incentive structures could get misaligned whenever you're dealing with a royalty structure where the franchisor is compensated based off of the revenues of the franchisee. The final negative is around development agreements. I think many franchisees new into the system, might be able to buy that first franchise with their personal savings or from money from friends and family. That's great. You don't have to bring on any debt. There's no personal guarantees. And so if you lose all your money, all you lose is the amount you put up. You're not putting your house at risk, other assets or whatever. That can change if the franchisor requires a development agreement. What a development agreement would indicate or dictate is that you add a number of stores over a set period. What's more is oftentimes in a development agreement, there will be a personal guarantee. Even though you might have been attracted to buying into a franchise because there wouldn't be a personal guarantee, that might all go away if the franchisor requires you to enter into a development agreement. Just another point to consider about buying into a franchise system. With the bad comes a lot of good, actually. I would say one of the initial benefits of evaluating a particular franchise is that you get a lot more information than you might get if you were just looking at a non-franchise type business. The information is coming from what is called the FDD, or the Franchise Disclosure Document. The FDD has a wealth of information, from startup costs to average revenues to pretty much anything under the sun that you are going to be required to do, or as much information as the franchisor can share about what to expect in terms of buying into that franchise. I mean, it's by no means the complete diligence you need to do on the brand, but it's a great starting point and it's tremendously helpful. The other helpful aspect of buying into a brand is the brand awareness. International, national brands like McDonald's, Burger King, Subway. It's a lot easier to start your own franchise or develop a franchise whenever there's a large mass that's behind you. It has momentum. It has not only awareness, but top of mind awareness, which is, incredibly hard to get. That brand awareness is huge. It's a big reason why you would be willing to pay that royalty or the fees to the franchisor. Building on that brand awareness, a big reason why that brand awareness is there is the marketing that the franchisor executes on your behalf. They're going to have a far larger marketing team than you would be able to afford at the franchisee level. If you think about some of the big franchise brands, I mean, they're getting NFL athletes, NBA athletes, famous actors and actresses. I mean, even though that it's very hard to determine how much that actually creates in terms of revenue and profits at your individual store, people start to associate certain celebrities and personalities with a brand. And I would say that that usually is helpful. Now, big disclaimer here, that as positive as being associated with a certain personality can be, there is absolutely the potential for a negative or impairment of that brand because of celebrity or personality. A great example here, especially when we've been talking about food a little bit, is with the spokesperson Jared Fogle for Subway. I don't think anybody watching this video not only know who Jared Fogle is, but doesn't also would have an idea of what they think about Jared Fogle as a person. Extremely negative, huge tarnishment for the brand, as well as very much impacted revenues, not only at the franchisor level, but at the franchisee level as well. Generally speaking, I think the marketing and the brand awareness component of working with a franchise is good. However, there is that disclaimer that there's the potential for the next Jared, if you will, to tarnish that brand. Buying into a franchise, you get a playbook. Now, I'm not saying it's a literal playbook. What I mean is that the franchisor has processes and procedures that have been developed and honed and optimized over time that will help the franchisee be more successful. This might be analysis, product innovation, a lot of different factors. Speaking of product innovation, you look at Taco Bell, for example. I feel like Taco Bell every month, or maybe even more frequently than that, has a new product to introduce. This is not how some companies do innovation, where originally on the label the letters were in blue, and their idea of brand innovation is now the letters are in red, and you should go out and buy every item that's on the shelf because the lettering is red now. You see new products from Taco Bell they're very creative, and that creativity and innovation gets people to remember Taco Bell, gets people to come into the stores. It's a tried and true recipe for success for that brand. Not only is it things like product innovation at the franchisor level, there's also operational components that can be very helpful. Let's talk about store hours or pricing. My view is that companies in particularly the lower middle market, are perhaps more unsophisticated in the area of pricing than other areas of the business. This is where a franchisor can be tremendously helpful, because they will not just have data points at your particular store, they'll have data points for the entire network. Pricing, it's no crystal ball, but certainly more data are helpful if you have a franchisor that is effective at analyzing that data. Similar story for store hours. You might be wondering whether or not you should close on Saturdays at noon, or you think maybe 5 p.m. would be good. In most businesses, you're just gonna have to try it out and see what works. In a franchise, oftentimes if you have a good relationship with your contact at the franchisor, you can talk about that with him or her and see what their thoughts are. You probably are gonna get to know a few other franchisees in the system, and that's the type of thing that you can discuss with them. Perhaps you're not gonna talk about this to the franchisee that's down the street, or if there's a lot in your city, maybe you'll go outside the city or outside the state. But still, the point remains. When I talk about the concepts of store hours and pricing, those aren't just two that I plucked out of the air. Those are two examples of how the franchisor is particularly helpful on a deal that we're working on, which I think is a great segue to talk about what our experience has been like on this particular franchise deal. We've got a great relationship with the franchisor, and we haven't even formally closed the deal just yet. Sometimes there's some hiccups, and not necessarily just hiccups. The franchisor does things or require certain things that we wish they didn't. But come on, I really don't think there's been anything that has been unreasonable. In fact, I would think that it would be unreasonable on our part to think that the franchisor is going to do everything that we ask of them. Yeah, it's not reasonable at all. All in all, the benefit we get from that franchisor far outweighs any friction. The second component that is unique to the particular deal that we're working on is that there's a lot of change at the franchisor level. To some people, this might feel risky or feel uncomfortable, but one of the pillars of the 4 pillars name is challenge the status quo. So I'm comfortable with this change, and in fact, it's really a breath of fresh air, all the changes that they're doing. When we look at some of the changes and what some of the new leadership has done in prior position in their career, we're excited about it. There's a reinvigoration to the brand that we get to be a part of. Unfortunately, that's just, it's not something that's replicable. You're not going to find this in every brand, or really you're not going to find it in many brands. But again, this is one unique element of working on a franchise deal that we've encountered, and is something at least to think about whenever you're evaluating whether or not you should buy into a franchise. One area where this concept of one more boss really hits home is Chick-fil-A. As much as we love that brand, we're never going to consider getting into that brand in its current form, if you will, because the current situation is that they'll only allow a franchisee to have, 1 or maybe 2 stores. Certainly not 10, 20, 50, hundreds. That works for them. It works for the franchisees in their system. But for a group like ours that, again, is looking to have tens of units, or if not hundreds of units, at least tens of units, the current situation just makes it a non-starter for us to try and get into the Chick-fil-A system. Now, Jared Fogle is certainly an interesting topic. If you'd like to hear more about how Jared Fogle plays into the overall Subway story, I did a whole video on Subway. You can find a link in the comments. It's also on my channel. You should check it out. Now, I appreciate all those who are still watching. You might be growing a little tired. I'm gonna come clean with you. I'm probably more tired than you are, because I haven't just recorded this video once, I've recorded it twice. Yeah, that's right. I forgot to hit the record button the first time. Showing that I need some help sometimes, let me know. What do you think is a franchise system that would be really attractive as a potential acquisition target? Let me know in the comments. What is one sign that a franchise is struggling? Well, if you look at the model, typically they're so attractive because they are asset light. And so in my view, a sign that a franchise is struggling would be they purchase franchise locations and own them under the corporate umbrella. Who's doing that? Well, I can tell you, it's not McDonald's, it's actually Burger King. Burger King has struggled in recent years, and there was a big announcement that they are buying one of their franchisees to convert it to corporate-owned locations. Why are they doing that? What do they hope to gain? What else is going on within the brand? Stay tuned, and we'll talk about that more here. When I say asset light, what I mean is that, you look at McDonald's or Burger King, they have all these locations and they don't really own many of those locations. They charge royalties and they charge fees from the franchisee for marketing and advertising. They'll have corporate headquarters and whatnot, but in terms of fixed assets, a lot of these companies really don't. Now, McDonald's has a slightly different model that perhaps we can get into in a different video, but generally speaking, in terms of the operations, these companies are really relying on their franchise base to most or almost all of the heavy lifting. If you've subscribed to my channel, you might see that there's at least a slight focus on QSR. So whenever we saw the news that Restaurant Brands International, the owner of Burger King, announced a big acquisition of one of its franchisees, we were definitely very interested. Restaurant Brands International doesn't just own Burger King, Popeyes, Firehouse Subs, as well as Tim Hortons. In terms of this acquisition that was just announced, it was a $1 billion transaction for a little over 1,000 units of Burger King within their system. Now, how big is that? It's actually about 15% of the total US footprint. There's just shy of 6,800 units in the US, per the latest figures that I was able to see. What's interesting is the target, Carroll's Restaurant Group, is actually public as well. Restaurant Brands International agreed to pay them a 23% premium over the 30-day moving average. The day that the deal was announced, it was a 13% premium to the stock price. So what did the company say whenever they were announcing this as to why and whatnot? Well, the big component of this, in my view, is that they are going to drastically speed up the pace of remodels to stores. So again, this group has about 1,000 stores. Burger King said, or Restaurant Brands International said, that they are going to try to get 600 of those units remodeled by 2028. Pretty fast pace to try and get through all of those by 2028. Additionally, what's interesting is that they expect to offload some of these units as time goes on, but the expectation as of now is that they are only going to release these in units or packages of around 50 or so. All this comes during a time when there's really a lot going on in the burger segment, in my opinion. Why do I say that? Well, a lot's going on with Burger King. They've been underperforming some of their peers. They're trying to shake things up with these remodels and new marketing initiatives. So clearly something's going on there. But who's the giant? McDonald's, obviously. They're even announcing changes. They're going through a process to try and revamp their burgers. Now, in my mind, whenever very consistent top performer announces that they're trying to improve one of their key products, it's pretty interesting. I don't know how it's going to take shape. I know that they just announced the reintroduction of a fan favorite, the double Big Mac, that I think has, instead of one patty on top and one patty on bottom, two patties on top and bottom, probably a little bit more than I would be interested in eating in one meal. But anyway, that's one area that they're trying to innovate, if you will. So a lot's going on in the burger segment, and Burger King needs to innovate and change if they want to pick up that lost share. In terms of looking at the bigger picture, what are some of the key takeaways whenever you look at this transaction as it relates to maybe not just Burger King, but perhaps QSR in general? The first one for sure is that remodels are a big deal. If you look at one of the best performing chains, Chick-fil-A, their operating cash flow that they're throwing off annually at a given location is probably well north of $1 million. It might be $3, $4, $5 million in some of those locations. So if you look at a remodel of one of those stores, even if it's $250,000 to $500,000, yeah, that's still a healthy chunk of change, but it's not really going to put the company at risk, or it's not rising to that level of magnitude, based off how much operating income they have. But if you look at smaller chains, a Subway, for example, their operating income per store might be, $50,000 to $100,000. If that really is the range, what would a remodel for a Subway cost? It might cost $50,000 to $100,000. So what you're looking at here is that depending on the franchise that you're in, the cost to remodel could be a very significant cost as it relates to your annual operating income. And where's the money going to come from? Can you pay it out of operating income? Will you have to take on some debt? It's tough to say. It's going to be situation by situation, but that's why why I think the point remains is that remodels in the QSR space are a really big deal. As it relates to Burger King, itself, I would say you can make the argument that franchisees haven't bought in to the turnaround strategy. The reason why I say that is that, if the operator of Carol's Restaurants, who again own 15% of the US locations, if they just, wholeheartedly believe that, yeah, this is the right strategy, let's redo our stores, let's introduce new menu items, and they were just 100% on board with that, I think that they would have started remodeling the stores at a faster clip on their own. I don't think it would have taken the franchisor to come in and purchase them outright in order to speed up the remodels. Certainly could be wrong there. It could just be a mindset on the part of the operator of Carol's that, the stores are doing pretty well. They don't need to be remodeled. But without that insider information, that would be one takeaway that I would have, is that if they were fully convinced that remodels were the right route to take, they would have done that already and been well on their way. As it relates to smaller franchisees, they might be looking to the big guys for guidance as to what they should do. If you're a smaller franchisee, you might have seen Carol's Restaurants not doing these remodels, and you might have kind of thought, well, if they don't think they're worth it, why should we do it? We only own 1, 2, 3, 5 units. It's a lot bigger deal for us to close a restaurant than it would be for a mammoth like them. Well, for those smaller franchisees, I would say that, they're potentially be at risk for not having their franchise agreements renewed. That's one of the key, hammers, I guess you could say, or the, if you think about a carrot versus a stick, that's one of the sticks that the franchisor has, is that, if the franchisee is not abiding by the franchise agreement, then there's a chance that the franchisor will not renew that franchise agreement. And then all of a sudden, your livelihood is gone. If you can't operate your store, it would be hugely consequential, because you don't have the operating income, but you probably still have the lease that you have to pay for. There might be other debt associated with it that you have to pay for. It could be completely devastating, really scary to think about. Finally, I think the shift by Restaurant Brands International to focus on smaller franchisees, definitely pluses and minuses to that strategy. And what I would say is that, it's not uncommon for brands or companies, to go from one side of the pendulum and swing all the way to the other. If you look at Carol's, 15% of the overall portfolio in the US was owned by one franchisor. Is that too much? I would be honest with you, I was surprised to see that it was that high. I think that perhaps something in the 5 to 10% range was more along the lines of what I expected. So I guess it's not super surprising to hear that after these remodels take place, they might want to offload those stores and break them up a bit. But to go so far as to package them in units of around 50, that's really interesting. Again, let's contrast that to a brand that's on the other side of the continuum, which is Subway. I mentioned numerous times before that Subway's model was really to try and keep the units controlled by one franchisee to be very small. Now that has started, the pendulum for Subway has started to shift the other way towards larger franchisees, because they're seeking that sophistication. Now, is Restaurant Brands, is what they're trying to do to strike like a happy balance between having franchisees that have the operational sophistication to run those stores really well, but without getting too large so they lose what the franchisor is calling that connection to the local market? Only time will tell there. I can't say that I think it's a terrible strategy. I can't say that I think it's the most amazing strategy. But again, it's a strategic decision that the brand is taking, and with any strategic decision, it's probably going to have its pluses, it's probably going to have its minuses, and only time will tell if it really is the right decision for this brand. Now, I realize not everyone eats at Burger King, but what do you think? Do you think Burger King needs to revamp its store layout, the look, the cleanliness, or the brightness? Let me know in the comments. What is something about the largest fast food chain that you probably can't find on the internet? Well, first off, if you're thinking about McDonald's, you would be wrong. The largest fast food chain is actually Subway, with approximately 40,000 restaurants throughout the world. What you won't be able to find on the internet, though, is why in fact are there 40,000 units? Now, obviously it makes some sense that the more units you have means you make more money, but McDonald's are much more profitable on a per unit basis than Subway. So why is there this disconnect? How did did Subway grow from selling about 300 sandwiches per day to almost 10 million today? Well, there are a lot of lessons in that growth and in the Subway story. Stay tuned to learn about all of these in this video. Subway was founded in 1965 by Fred DeLuca with an investment by a doctor named Peter Buck. Like I said, the first day they sold about 300 sandwiches. I think it was called Super Subs, and that was the start of a future empire. The concept, which we all know, is to see the food made in front of you with fresh meats, fresh produce, made it your way on a variety of different breads. Seems commonplace now, but at the time it was a novel concept.
Subway, eat fresh.
For many restaurateurs, when starting a new chain, the goal is to franchise and to grow, maybe not into tens of thousands of units like Subway, but certainly it is to grow. I would say that Fred DeLuca's goals were very ambitious, right from the start. What you probably won't learn on the internet about Subway was how ambitious Fred DeLuca was about growth. Now, a lot of times in the franchise world, people will talk about a franchisee's territory and how far from the doors that territory lasts. And what they would always say about Subway is your territory ended with the first step out the front door. There's anecdotes that there was a Subway restaurant on one corner. Fred or somebody from the company went to that franchisee, told them they want another restaurant at the other corner. The franchisee resisted, and Fred or whoever brought in a competitor to open up that store since the franchisee already won. Fast forward to today, if you understand the system, if you know the system, you can definitely tell that there are areas where the Subway is oversaturated. My personal opinion is that a big reason for that is the approach that Subway took towards development. There is one key theme that persists throughout the Subway franchise that is relevant in terms of the approach that different types of business owners take. Now, looking back to the development goals and strategy that Fred DeLuca employed, it was really about minimizing upfront costs and maximizing unit growth pretty much at all costs. At the face of it, that sounds like it's gonna have some great appeal to more people. If the upfront costs are lower, then maybe more people can become a franchisee as opposed to with a more expensive chain like McDonald's, for example. So again, at the face of it, it looks great because you're definitely going to be able to appeal to a broader audience. You start to observe the impacts that approach had on areas that you might not think might have. So for example, there are definitely a few characteristics of Subways that don't exist in other chains. One, it was quite common for Subway franchisees to not optimize the location of their Subway based off of foot traffic, accessibility, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these folks, in the goal of trying to minimize upfront costs, would pick real estate that was, quite frankly, the cheapest. It was the lowest risk, the lowest monthly rent, tenant improvement fees, et cetera, et cetera. So again, that's great in terms of getting your store counts up, but in the long term, you're gonna have locations that are at subpar real estate, and instead of having 500,000 in unit sales, perhaps that store, if it moved 3, 5, 7 blocks away, could be at $1 million or at least 750,000. There are a few different areas in which Fred's desire to grow actually hurt the chain in terms of total revenues because of, in this case, real estate selection. The other example is how the franchise base is constituted at present. There are a vast number of franchisees. There are far more franchisees in the Subway system than in systems like McDonald's, Burger King, et cetera, et cetera. The average in the US is something between 1 and 2 units per franchisee, which is really low. Why is that? The whole concept around starting a Subway restaurant was almost as if it was you were buying a job. It's been a stable source of income for a lot of families, and that's great, not gonna fault that. What you do find is you find less sophistication with franchisees that own 1 to 2 units as opposed to franchisees that own 10, 20, 30, or 40 units. In the larger systems, you might not see averages of 40 units per franchisee, but regardless, you do see a higher level of sophistication of management practices, people sharing, et cetera, et cetera. You see that more in the larger franchisees than in the smaller ones. We're not trying to be critical of the smaller franchisees, that they're doing a great job. It's just a different type of approach and it's a different mindset whenever you are running 10 stores as opposed to 1 or 2. When talking about Subway, I think the elephant in the room is Jared. I think everybody knows that story. I don't really think we need to rehash it here. However, I certainly will provide my take, especially in the culture in which we live today. And what that is that whenever a brand is attached very closely to one specific person or personality or whatever you want to call it, you can have a great amount of return from that affiliation, but you can also suffer a great deal of harm. I mean, Jared was just the classic of both. It was such a great story because he lost all that weight and turned into such a tragic story once you learned about what type of person he was. I think the takeaway is that that's the risk you run whenever you attach yourself to one specific person or personality. If you look at other sports or if you look at other companies and how they affiliate with different athletes and whatnot, there are parallels when you look at other companies and how they use athletes to be brand ambassadors. Subway, for example, right now uses several different athletes in several different sports. That's strategic on their part because they want a little bit more diversification. Maybe they don't get into the Jared situation again, where one of those athletes falls into disfavor for whatever reason and it harms the brand. Now, if that were to happen, they could just pivot to one or more of the other brand ambassadors that they have in other sports. Looking back a few years, you definitely have seen this from other brands. For example, Tiger Woods, there was a period where a lot of advertisers weren't too keen on putting him front and center. You've seen a lot of stories as of late where brands are ending their affiliation with their ambassadors because of something they do on social media or some story that pops up. After Jared, the next big event, if you will, in the history of Subway was the death of Fred DeLuca in 2015. After the death of Fred, the brand went through a very tough transition. First, his sister took over. I would say that the period of time when his sister took over was not the peak of Subway, if you will. I don't know what she did directly or indirectly, just looking at the performance of the brand as a whole. It certainly wasn't a period of great success. Not sure if she was the one that directed this or someone else, but I do know that during this period, there was a push to eliminate as much salt as possible from the menu items at Subway. And I don't know if you've ever tried to make bread without salt or if you've ever tried lunch meat without salt, but it's not very good. And I know there are people out there that say, well, lunch meat's terrible for you because it's got so much salt or this or that. I'm not here to argue with you or agree or disagree. Certainly had impact on maybe not food quality, but at least on the taste as perceived by the core users of Subway. After one sister took over, it was rumored that another sister was going to take over. What was lesser known at the time was that Fred's widow actually had the right to come in, take control of the company due to what was provided for in the will. She stepped in, she put in professional management, and the company's really doing quite well from our perspective. The CEO she hired is a guy named John Chidsey. In addition to companies like Avis and whatnot, he led a turnaround at Burger King. From the outside, it appears as though the playbook he used at Burger King is largely being used at Subway, with a few tweaks due to the different type of concept, but they've done a lot of great things, and the brand is really on an upward trajectory. They've refreshed the stores, they have totally revamped the menu, and not just the menu, but the underlying proteins, produce, and breads. They've kicked off, additional marketing campaigns, and if you pay attention in the business press, you're seeing month after month of record sales gains and store performance for the brand. It's really a positive story. My name is Nick McLean, and perhaps all the exciting guys in private equity know where all the new and hot places are, but steady old Nick still likes Subway. If you do too, let me know what your favorite sub is. And while you're at it, like and subscribe.
I'm proud to present to you the future of Subway sandwiches.
First is scope. No matter which way you slice it, Subway is big. Subway is the largest restaurant chain in the world, second largest franchise chain of any type behind 7-Eleven, and in the US, around 50% more stores than the second largest franchise, McDonald's. In terms of revenues, Subway is much lower on the list at number 8, but that is still very sizable and dwarfs the other sandwich chains such as Jimmy John's. Another reason we like this chain is that it's easy to operate and thus be profitable at lower average unit volumes or AUVs. My team has attended, and thankfully passed, Subway University. Now this team has experience in a wide range of food industries, from coffee to chicken to full service. We knew the operations were simple, but actually being in a store and manning a shift allowed us to see how simple the operations actually are. The simplicity of operations is reflected in CapEx spend. The system average AUV for Subway is approximately $441,000. New ovens cost $5,000 to $10,000. Toaster ovens in that range as well. Refrigeration can be costlier. Then there are the rooftop units that occasionally break down and need to be repaired or replaced. But ovens and refrigeration and HVAC systems last at least 5 years. Some franchisees have been using the same ovens for 10 years. Finally, to remodel a Subway restaurant costs between $40,000 and $60,000, with remodels being due every 7 years according to the Franchise Disclosure Document, or FDD. The point here is that the CapEx required for Subway is much less than the 2 to 3% figure for restaurants as a whole, as should be expected. CapEx is closer to 1% actually. Even though the operations within a store are less complex as compared to other brands, the franchisor makes life simpler still with a robust playbook, as we call it. This playbook consists of best practices, technological tools, support, and various other tools. After all, in 57 years, Subway has learned a lot.
We have talked to many franchisees that bristle at the thought of doing it the quote-unquote Subway way. What's our take? Well, if we thought we could do it better than Subway, we wouldn't get into the system. We would either start our own brand or find another brand to get into. Part of the reason for entering into a franchise system is all the experience, all the brand recognition, all of those things. And if we're not going to take advantage of that, then we're the fools for getting into the system.
Subway is also unique in terms of the number of franchisees within the system. In the US, the average number of stores per franchisee is less than 2. As a consolidator, this represents a huge potential market and one in which there will be several swings of the bat allowed, meaning unlike in other industries, if you miss out on a deal, it is tough to say when you will have another chance. Not the case with Subway, and a very important factor in assessing the likely success of an M&A strategy. More on the current CEO shortly, but in an article published by QSR magazine, he is reported as saying that he told the families that if they truly want to fix the brand in the US and grow it internationally, industry veterans with scale needed to enter the system. That is just the message the PE likes to hear. Finally, the dynamics within the family and the C-suite are better than they have ever been. After decades of either family and/or family foundations calling the shots, in 2019 it was decided to finally bring in a non-family member as CEO, a guy by the name of John Chidsey. Prior to his hiring, Subway had experienced 6 consecutive years of negative sales growth. Chidsey was tasked with reversing this trend and brought on board executives from McDonald's, Burger King, Outback Steakhouse, Focus Brands, Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, Pepsi, and Michael's, among others. Together, they have implemented a number of different initiatives. First off, fix the food. There was a period in the 90s and into the 2000s when the sister of the late founder Fred DeLuca ran the business. Trying to build on the reputation for being the healthy option, she made it an imperative to drastically reduce salt in all of the food. The rationale is clear for lower sodium intake, but you can't make bread or cold cuts without salt and expect it to taste good. To improve the food, the brand has introduced new sandwiches, new proteins, new veggies, including an avocado option, and new cheeses, including a fresh mozzarella option. A recent menu addition, introduced in April 2024, is a new lineup of wraps featuring a lavash-style flatbread that has a soft and bubbly texture, which follows the introduction of quote-unquote sidekicks, which are foot-long pretzels, cookies, and churros. What's more, they simplified the menu to allow for ordering by number while also introducing premium ingredients.
If you watch my video on Southwest Airlines, you might recall that I really like it when one part of the strategy or one decision complements or benefits many other parts of the overall strategy. Ordering by number has many benefits. It improves the guest experience. Now they don't have to answer 10, 12, 14 questions and tell them I want 3 olives and 4 pickles or whatever. It streamlines operations for the sandwich artist. It's much easier to make a predetermined sandwich as opposed to, again, ask 14 questions about how it's to be made. It allows for easier digital adoption. And you want to know the last one? It's kind of surprising. The Subway chefs have been able to analyze certain sandwiches made by consumers. And do you know what? It turns out that the chefs don't like the sandwiches that many of the consumers made. I don't want to say the consumers have bad taste. It's just what they would do is they'd say, I like all 5 of these ingredients. Let's put them all together. Whenever chefs would tell you, those 5 ingredients probably don't make sense going together.
The second component of Chidsy's plan was to update the restaurants. We all probably have recollections of going into a Subway and it being somewhat dark and dingy, or perhaps even feeling a little dirty. No more. There is a new design strategy that is bringing light and life back to the stores. If you haven't been in a store recently, visit one that has been remodeled and see what I mean. And check out the food while you are there. Now, Subway will never be, nor want to be, a gourmet option, but it is fresh, with many options, which is what is important to many consumers. The third leg of the strategy, spend the ad budget on, well, advertising.
What? You might be asking yourself, isn't that what's already done? Well, the short answer is no, it's not.
This is entirely legal and disclosed in the Franchise Disclosure Document, or FDD, but the company is not required to spend all of the ad revenue paid by the franchisees on advertising. If they so desired, they could instead drop a portion of that to their own bottom line, which is exactly what they chose to do. Chidsy made the determination that the ad budget was going to be spent on advertising and recruited A-list celebrities and sports figures, such as my own hometown favorite Patrick Mahomes, plus Tom Brady, Steph Curry, Charles Barkley, Derek Jeter, Simone Biles, and many others.
This is a great example of the law of unintended consequences. General managers within the system have reported that it's actually been easier to hire young people for certain positions because they now associate the brand with some of their favorite celebrities or their favorite athletes.
As it relates to his experience, turnarounds are nothing new to John as he turned around another QSR brand, Burger King. Additionally, it was announced in late 2023 that Rourke Capital would be buying the franchisor. That was a great development as Rourke is the ideal buyer for Subway considering its vast and deep experience in the franchise sector. Fourth is that Subway is relatively early in its digital evolution and adoptions. 2 reasons that Rourke must be excited about buying Subway is that Subway is early in this in conjunction with the huge ad budget. What this means is that Subway will now be able to spend advertising dollars more effectively by implementing, in essence, one-to-one marketing via the app. Here is another reason that ordering by number is important because consumers don't want to answer 14 questions on an app regarding how they want their sandwich made. According to technology partner Capgemini, the results of the digital evolution are already positive. Digital sales have seen double-digit growth from 2021 to 2022 and have tripled since 2019. The refreshed POS is easier for digitally native sandwich artists to navigate. And finally, automated menu updates reduce administration for franchisees. These changes, taken as a whole, are being acknowledged and recognized by experts in the industry. Not only did Subway increase same-store sales for 13 consecutive quarters, the influential trade publication QSR Magazine named Subway its transformational brand of the year.
I fully expect my viewpoint to ruffle some feathers, and others out there will have a very logical and detailed list as to why my ideas are bad or good. There are several counterpoints that I think I at least need to bring up, whether or not you agree with my defense of those or you disagree.
Number 1, I hear all these stories about Subway franchisees not being able to make a profit. First off, in a system with almost 40,000 stores globally, there are bound to be operators that perform very well and those that perform, let's say, less well.
Don't judge me on those 2 guys. This next guy's my protege. He's top of his class, and for his thesis, he made a party sub.
Regardless, there's more to the story here. In order to get that story, it is helpful to understand the development strategy of the brand for the first several decades of its existence. During this period, the goal was development at all costs. To do this, Subway offered a package that required much less upfront capital than the other brands, but went one step further. In order to run a restaurant, you of course need real estate on which to locate your store. While many of the operators that DeLuca was targeting would not have sufficient personal liquidity to satisfy potential landlords. To get around this, Subway, the franchisor, was the actual lessee who then subleased it to the actual operator. Because of this model, you had folks that were essentially buying a job.
I'm fully supportive of the concept of buying a job, but if so, that should be the actual objective and not the consequence of buying a small business or a franchise such as Subway. When I use the term buying a job, what I mean is buying a business with the intention of that job being your primary income. Perhaps you leave a corporate job, decide you want to pursue something entrepreneurial, you need to replace your income, therefore you purchase this business. Nothing wrong with that at all, fully supportive of it. However, what I have seen is that sometimes folks buy a business not with the intention of simply buying a job, it's meant to be an investment, and instead it turns into their full-time job. Buying a job is good if that is the actual objective, not so good when it's an unintended consequence.
There were a few problems with the development at all costs strategy though. First, it led to, at the very least, a perception that the brand had oversaturated the market. More importantly, the restaurants were located in suboptimal locations. Now, everyone knows the adage that the three most important factors in real estate are location, location, location. However, many early franchisees made the decision to obtain a location with the lowest rent because that felt the safest. Because of suboptimal site selection, there are of course a high number of stores that are not profitable or just above break even. When asked about closing stores, the brand made the following statement: "We have spent the past 2 years optimizing our footprint by using a strategic, data-driven approach to ensure restaurants are in the right location, image, and format. This includes opening new locations, with quality remaining a top priority, relocating restaurants to maximize guest traffic, and closing locations when needed." There are several key points there, one of which being that Subway now uses a data-driven approach to site selection. In an article by Reuters, franchise advisor Robert Edwards is quoted as saying, "Continued closings can also hurt public perception."
While I am sure Robert couldn't care less what I think, I completely disagree with his opinion. I think that there's actually negative brand equity being developed whenever you keep stores open that are not performing, that are dark and dingy. If you open new stores or relocate, you're gonna have a buzz, you're gonna have some excitement. That is far better than simply not closing a store because you think that has a negative brand perception. Again, in my opinion.
Second, there are simply too many Subways in the US. Though mentioned above, oversaturation is still a concern to many, despite the fact that sources indicate Subway has closed about 6,000 stores since 2015. Between the beginning of 2020 and 2023, Subway shuttered a net of 3,200 US stores. That lost footprint alone would be among the top 20 biggest quick service chains in America. There is an argument to be made that there aren't too many Subways, just that they are located in suboptimal locations, and that some operators aren't as skilled as others.
At the risk of sounding critical, you might ask why I am in any position to offer any sort of critique on franchisees within the system. I can tell you that between myself and my team, we have visited or evaluated over 1,000 Subway restaurants. We have seen firsthand what the best operators are doing, and because of this, we've been able to determine where there are areas for improvement.
Here is one example of an area in which franchisees could try to learn from the best operators. In talking to the best-in-class operators, they all stressed that increased store hours were a critical factor in driving increased revenues and profitability. It helps increase sales via third-party delivery services as one major reason. However, as an anecdote, let's turn to a very successful Burger King franchisee. He wanted to get all of his stores running 24/7. The most interesting part is that staying open later actually increased sales during the normally scheduled open times as well. To expand on that, normally his stores might close at 10 p.m. Once he started expanding hours, not only did revenue increase during the additional store hours, it also increased during the 2 to 3 hours leading up to the former closing time. In this case, that might have been between the hours of 8 and 10 or 7 and 10. Number 4, there's a history of bad decisions or decisions that benefited the franchisor. Can't argue about this one, at least looking back. The Jared Fogle incident was awful, but so was the $5 footlong promotion. There were also the claims about Subway's bread not actually being bread, and the tuna not being real tuna.
2 customers at Subway say there wasn't tuna in their tuna sandwich, and they are suing the sandwich shop.
However, it is moot in my opinion now that Chinsey is running the show and that Rourke is coming in. The best franchise operators, and Rourke is at the top of that list, know without any doubt that franchisee health is what is most important, not maximizing royalties. Franchisee health means unit-level profitability. That being said, some would point to a recent decision by the brand to introduce slicers as being yet another decision that reduces franchisees' profitability. Some franchisees have argued that sales didn't increase while labor costs did. What hasn't fully been felt yet, though, are the food cost savings. By purchasing unsliced meats, Subway was able to get a higher number of competitive quotes. Once the new protein contracts are in place, food costs as a percentage of sales are expected to go down by about 200 basis points or 2 full percentage points, which will more than make up for any increased labor costs. Another potentially controversial decision is the switch from Coke products to Pepsi. The switch makes sense from a business perspective because now Subway has one supplier for its drinks and snacks, but the reaction from consumers is still a developing story. Number 5. What about this brand or that brand? Of course, there are other brands that might be sexier or more appealing. There are also other boring brands out there that might share some of the similar traits with Subway. But Subway owns the value sandwich space hands down. Further, part of the reason for picking Subway here is that it is a bit contrarian. In 3 to 5 years, it will be easier to determine if now was a good time to get into the brand.
One of the challenges in investing, whether it's public or private equities, real estate, some other asset class, is picking the right time to get in and the right time to get out. Well, it's far too early for me to say when the right time to exit the Subway system would be. Of course, it's not for several years. However, I do feel fairly confident, very confident, that now is the right time to get in.
Number 6, the food sucks. I realize many people might feel this way, but it turns out many more people actually don't. There's been research performed by LRW and Bain. In that, it shows, in blind taste tests, people actually think the food tastes good. In fact, participants were more likely to say they crave food from Subway than Jimmy John's and Potbelly, while only trailing Firehouse and Jersey Mike's by 3 percentage points each. Subway was the clear leader, though, in other categories, such as value, having something for everyone, and being conveniently located. However, this sentiment does lead me into one of the biggest challenges I think Subway faces.
In my humble opinion, the biggest challenge the brand faces right now is that it has to change the hearts and minds of the guests that they've lost over the years. My own personal experience is, 5-6 years ago, I ate at a Subway restaurant and I thought to myself, I'm probably never going to come back to a Subway. It wasn't terrible, it was just completely bland and did not enjoy the experience at all. It was really just eating to get calories in my body to keep me going. However, when I heard about the revamped menu and all the changes that the brand was undergoing, decided to try it again, and really, I think the food's decent. I go there regularly now simply because of all the changes that have been made. And believe me, I am no connoisseur. Just ask my sister. But I can appreciate things like freshly sliced meats, fresher vegetables, including an avocado option, and fresh cheeses like mozzarella. I don't know if anyone in the audience remembers or even ever watched the movie Road Trip, but in it, there's a scene in which one of the main characters, Ruben, is asked about the route that they're taking. He says, it's a shortcut. It's supposed to be a challenge. If it were easy, it would just be the way. The same with investing. If investing were easy, we wouldn't develop nicknames for people like the Oracle of Omaha. Personally speaking, I tend to get most excited about investment opportunities when I've been able to develop a level of knowledge about the company or the industry that 1, most people don't have, and 2, if they did have that knowledge, they would get excited about the opportunity as well. Subway 100% checks those boxes. I've checked it out, you should too. So we've talked a little bit about Subway on prior videos, but there's another sandwich chain that I think's equally interesting to talk about, albeit for different reasons. Quiznos. Quiznos, it's a weird name. Is there a reason behind that name, or does anyone know how they picked that? The story is that the original owners were told that names with Q or Z in them were more memorable to consumers, and so to reduce the odds, or improve the odds, I guess you should say, they picked a name with Q and Z. How did that really work out for them? We're gonna talk about the brand as a whole, how it got started, the rise, the fall, and our views as to why the company has struggled so much, not just in the middle of its life, but as of late as well. My name is Nick McLean with 4 Pillars Investors, and I would be the last one to say that I'm the foremost authority on really any subject. However, I can say that 4 Pillars and myself personally have looked at a large number of QSR opportunities over the years. Not only different brands, but different concepts, different operators, different franchisors, different owners, et cetera, et cetera. Quiznos was founded in 1981 by Jimmy Lambados and Todd Disner. These two guys had really a chef focused, a high quality food focus that they wanted to bring to the QSR space. In fact, Jimmy and Todd actually cooked for well-known folks like Elvis and the Rolling Stones. Their success in the industry is clear, really impressive. I mean, how many people have cooked for Elvis? They only owned the chain though for about 6 years, selling it to a father and son team by the name of Rick and Richard Shaden. Those two drove it through the years of high growth and also were there during the years of decline. What exactly does that mean? You might not know this, maybe you do. I mean, they got to the point where they had almost 5,000 units worldwide. And if you look at a brand like Subway today, you know, they have approximately 44,000 units worldwide. Pales in comparison. If you look at some of the other sandwich competitors today, I mean, they're right there. The second largest one is probably Jimmy John's. They have, I think, 2,800, you know, maybe closer to 3,000. Potbelly has around 500. Firehouse Subs has, you know, just over 1,000. So when you look at Quiznos having around 5,000, I mean, that's pretty good scale. But where is Quiznos today? They have around 300 to 400 units. I mean, clearly something had to have happened for them to become the second largest sandwich chain, and now to the point of, you know, relative obscurity where I don't even know where the closest Quiznos is to me. How exactly did that happen? Quiznos as a franchise, you know, grew very rapidly up until the Great Recession. Then unsurprisingly, during the Great Recession began a period of decline. What's interesting though is even after the Great Recession, the brand continued that decline. What was going on within the brand at that time? Well, one key component was that franchisees were really struggling. There was the fact that the food costs were very high. What I think is more important though is that from a consumer standpoint, there really wasn't a level of differentiation that was sufficient to justify the higher cost. I don't know what your impressions of Quiznos are, but I think they had higher quality meats. I think that their sandwich size was a little bit smaller than Subway's. I definitely remember it being toasted, and I remember it having, you know, some sauces. One of their taglines, I believe, was toasty.
Try our new peppercorn Parmesan turkey with bacon sub for $3.49 only at Quiznos. Toasty.
That toastiness is, you know, definitely part of their brand. Their view was that heat or warmth brings out the flavors in pretty much every food. An example of, you know, these higher costs and the challenge to be profitable is a promotion that the CEO ran regarding Quiznos prime rib cheesesteak. The CEO said, you know, offered 100% money back guarantees, double the meat, and it was higher quality than Subway. And, you know, first off, I think it definitely can be a questionable tactic to compete against a competitor and mention their name, because I mean, you're giving them free press. But even so, I mean, look at what he was saying. Okay, we're gonna give you twice the amount of meat.
Not doing that again. I burned.
And it's higher quality. You know, quality is subjective, but double the meat is more quantifiable. But, you know, it begs the question, okay, if doubling the meat is so important, you can do that at Subway. I don't remember the exact pricing at that point in time, but, you know, given that Subway has always been a value play, I think Subway would still have been priced very similarly to Quiznos, or maybe even a little bit more with double meat. And so that example is very important because in my eyes, it's somewhat questionable as to why that whole program was run in the first place. I think another good example of why franchisees struggled are the startup costs. The startup costs today, if you go to the Quiznos website, it's estimated to be around $500,000 on the low side to almost 1.5 million on the high side. I'm also not sure exactly what the average revenues would be for a Quiznos, but if you say a Subway's average revenues are about 500,000, which is accurate, let's just be generous and say that an average revenues for a Quiznos are $1 million.
Toasty.
And again, let's be generous and say net income margins are 15%. I mean, that might not even account for the owner's salary. And if you're making $150,000, you're gonna have a very long payback if you invest $1.5 million. There's compounding factors, with the differentiation, the higher food costs, the higher startup costs, all of these added together to create a situation in which the franchisees, it was very hard for them to make any money. And that was a big reason for the decline. So when you look at the chains like Jimmy John's and Firehouse and Potbelly's a little bit smaller, but all of these other brands are still a pretty decent size. I mean, what happened to Quiznos? My personal opinion, it really came down to 4 different issues. The first one, I think, is just questionable management at the franchisor level in general. From the perception of the franchisees that the franchisor was charging too much for the food, that is certainly questionable, to some of the marketing objectives and marketing programs that they ran. They actually expanded into gyms, places where you work out, because the CEO said that their core competency was franchising.
Not doing that again. I burned.
All of these things, maybe they would have been successful in a different time period, with different consumer preferences or whatever, but ignoring whether or not the franchisor was making too much money on the food cost, generally speaking, was a huge issue for the ultimate success of the brand. The food costs were too high, and because of that, the franchisees struggled. If food costs are going to be higher, then subsequently you probably need to charge more for your products or your food. But that kind of exacerbates the issue that consumers didn't feel like there was enough differentiation or enough increase in quality to justify that higher cost, which leads us to the next point, innovation. I mean, sometimes whenever there is a new innovative product, the price sensitivity of the consumer won't be as great because it's exciting. I want to try that. That looks really good. Really wasn't that innovation there at Quiznos, unfortunately for the brand. Again, mentioning Subway, they introduced the Eat Fresh campaign.
Subway, eat fresh.
I mean, that was very successful for the brand whenever people were really excited about eating fresher foods, because that not only had good health connotations, also it was just, I think it made people feel good. They thought it tasted better because it felt fresh. I mean, what was the innovation going on at Quiznos? There was any. I think they just doubled down on toasted subs and purportedly higher quality ingredients, as well as the sauces and some innovative flavors. That brings us to our last point, the most important. If you look at the fact that they toasted their subs as well as the sauces and other flavors, the unfortunate part for the brand is that those are very easy to replicate. All you need is a toasting oven and introduce some sauces. I mean, you don't even have to create your own sauce. You could partner with a popular sauce. I guess a real popular one right now would be sriracha. That's relatively easy to do, or if you can create an alternative. Those are 2 easy to replicate aspects of your strategy, and you know what? Subway did just that.
Runs, tender chicken, zesty marinara sauce, melted cheese on toasted freshly baked bread. Subway, eat fresh.
I don't know this for a fact, but what I've heard is that whenever Subway introduced their toasting ovens, they actually called it the Quiznos killer, because they thought that simply introducing a toasted component to their subs would essentially kill off the competition from Subway. If that really was true, I really can't argue with it. I mean, if you look at the numbers of how quickly the brand has declined, you could make a strong argument that the toasting component at Subway really was a Quiznos killer. Another questionable decision by management was who they chose to be the mascot for the brand. I mean, if you look at Subway, they had Jared Fogle, which, again, turned out to be a disaster.
Not doing that again.
I think it's hard to foresee what happened there, but let's just look before all the awful stories came out. He lost a whole bunch of weight eating Subway sandwiches. I mean, that's a pretty good story. And of course, I think a brand would want to capitalize on that. What did Quiznos do? Well, they introduced as their mascot things called sponge monkeys. Now, do you remember what the sponge monkeys are? They're kind of potato shaped, look like rodents with human teeth, and one of them I think plays a guitar, and they sing about how much they love Quiznos sandwiches.
We love these subs, 'cause they are toasty subs. The Quiznos subs, they are so good we need them robot eating roast is barbaric.
I will say that there's probably a certain component of the population that just thought this was, hilarious and loved the sponge monkeys, but at the very least, it's a debatable strategy as to whether or not that was a effective decision to have the sponge monkeys be the mascot for the brand. So given that the investment required to open a Quiznos is higher, what do some of the other components look like, and how do they compare? Certainly the upfront investment I think for Subway is less, but what's interesting is that the royalty percentage charge as well as the percentage for the ad fund is lower for Quiznos on both counts. It's a 5% royalty and 2% to the ad fund. At Subway, it's 8% for royalty and 4.5% for the ad fund. That's interesting. Lower upfront for Subway, but higher recurring charges where it's flipped for Quiznos. What's important to the franchisee? I mean, I think to some degree that the franchisees should probably support a little bit higher marketing if it's coming out of their revenue, which is going to be variable based on how successful they are. That's a big reason for the resurgence in Subway's brand, because they have this massive $500 million plus ad budget annually that they can use to hire people like, one of my favorites, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady. Some of those things are counterintuitive because, for me, what I would like to see is lower upfront and more going to advertising as opposed to the Quiznos model. Me personally, I'm not in love with the franchise model that Quiznos has in place currently. So if those are all the reasons for why Quiznos has struggled, I mean, where is the brand today? Well, they're actually trying to bank on nostalgia a little bit. What I mean by that is after a roughly 20-year absence, they're bringing the Sponge Monkeys back.
Road trips are part of the American...
We are back on a road trip to get to Quiznos.
I like it a little bit because it's so unique, but definitely time will tell as to whether or not this will be successful and effective for them. Additionally, they've shifted to have a social media focus. Even though they only have around 300 or 400 units, they actually have over 100,000 followers on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, which is pretty substantial for such a small brand. The questionable part there though is based on our research, they're only spending about $110,000 in social media advertising. It just seems woefully inadequate when you're looking at a brand like Subway that's spending $500 million. Now, of course, Quiznos at 300, 400 units or whatever, you can't compete with a chain that has 44,000 worldwide. But I certainly feel like they need to inflict some pain on themselves and increase their marketing in the short term if they're going to have success and be able to reverse those numerous years of decline and start to go back on the upswing. And today we're going to talk about another smaller brand like Quiznos, but in the burger space.
I don't know, In-N-Out Burger?
In-N-Out was founded by husband and wife Harry and Esther Snyder in 1948 in California. It was a little bit different and also even technologically advanced. Not only were they the first hamburger drive-through in the state of California, Harry invented a two-way speaker system for the drive-through. Folks like Gordon Ramsay, the celebrity chef, it's like one of his favorite, if not his very favorite, fast food places. And also, I mean, this isn't a celebrity chef with a TV show, but he's still very famous, Thomas Keller. He has this restaurant in San Francisco called the French Laundry, which is an interesting name for a restaurant, but regardless, it's world renowned, super hard to get reservations, and I'm sure it's like $300 for one person or whatever. However, he's a huge fan of the restaurant as well. And not only that, they were having an anniversary party restaurant, the French Laundry, which has all sorts of fancy food and whatnot. And what did they serve at the anniversary party? In-N-Out. I mean, it's crazy. So, I mean, why is it so popular? Well, I think, first off, I mean, they do start with only fresh ingredients. No frozen patties, no prepackaged, ingredients or whatever. And so I definitely think in this day and age, freshness is very important and is a, key determinant in how popular the food also is. But on top of this, there's just some, quirks or interesting components to it. I would say the number one interesting quirk and component is the menu that is referred to as the secret menu, even though everybody knows about it and it's not really secret. That's, I think, one of the popular items or styles off that menu is the animal style, and there are all sorts of other styles. Orders with just meat and cheese, like no bun. There's an order where you can get, instead of a bread bun, you have tomato slices as the bun. You can get 2 patties and 2 slices of cheese, 3 patties and 3 slices of cheese, and up to 4 now. Interesting note about going up to 4, there didn't used to be a limit. However, a customer walked in and really wanted to test this, and he ordered a 100 by 100 patties and 100 slices of cheese. They filled the order, but after that is when they implemented the limit to only 4 patties and 4 slices of cheese. Even though Harry and Esther had a hit concept, they really didn't grow very fast. Harry and Esther ran the company from 1948 until Harry's death in 1976. After the father Harry died in 1976, one of his sons Rich took over, and over the next 20-ish years, grew up from 18 restaurants all the way up to 93. Now, in this family, there are a number of tragic events, and one of those is surrounding the death of Rich. He died in a plane crash. We were following a 757 into landing, and they got too close, and the turbulence, or the wake of the 757 caused turbulence for Rich's plane, and it crashed, leading changes to closely smaller aircraft could follow larger aircraft. Regardless, the other brother, Guy, took over after Rich's death and continued the growth from about 93 restaurants all the way up to 140. Oh, another sad story here. Guy died from an overdose of painkillers, and at that point, there were no children left, and the mother, Esther, stepped back in to run the company. Today, the grandchild, Lindsay Snyder, is now the majority shareholder. She had some shares that were awarded or that she owned through a trust until a certain age, and once she got to be a certain age, then she took majority control, and she is the leading family member. However, it's reported that most of the major decisions are still made a vote of the key executive members of the company. Esther Snyder ran the company from 1999 until her death in 2006. At that point, her granddaughter, Lindsay, was only 23. In 2012, at the age of 30, she gained 50% control of the company, and in 2017, at the age of 35, gained the remainder control. Now for a bit of trivia. Opening in 1948, what would you have guessed that the price for a hamburger was? Well, won't make you guess for too long. 25 cents. A hamburger for 25 cents when the chain opened. 10 years after they opened, they did start offering fountain drinks, and they were pretty pricey. They would have cost you a whole dime. Oh, think about where prices are today. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could get a fountain drink or a cheeseburger for 30 cents or almost a whole meal? I guess not with a cheeseburger, but you could get a hamburger, fries, and a drink for 50 cents. Wow. I mean, what a crazy world to think that was ever possible. Additionally, if you've been to the store recently or over a long period of time, actually, you might remember that originally they sold Pepsi, Coke. Do you have any idea why that is? Now, originally, I just thought that, as brands get bigger, that the pressure from Coke gets more, or the people that go there, really prefer Coke. No, that's not it at all. Pepsi bought a rival burger joint called Hot and Fresh. That really bothered Harry Snyder. Brand would have stayed loyal to Pepsi. At that point, decided to make the move from Pepsi to Coke. It's really interesting because, again, from my perspective, you always hear about stores, moving from Pepsi to Coke because of customer sentiment or this or that. So it's just really interesting to hear that it was because Pepsi bought a rival brand that Harry just got upset and moved to Coke. I mean, I can't really blame them, but again, it's just an interesting story. Even though you might expect In-N-Out to be super popular wherever it goes, there are still some areas where the, I guess I would call it the incumbent burger player is more popular. A great example of that is Texas. In Texas, there's a very popular burger chain called Whataburger. Even though In-N-Out has some locations there, in talking to people that live in some of those areas, again, this is anecdotal, but what they found is that there continue to be high traffic at Whataburger with the In-N-Outs not getting very much traffic. So, again, it seems as though in some markets where there's an entrenched, very popular, fan favorite, if you will, In-N-Out perhaps might not be as popular. So if you made it this far, hats off to you, and I really want to at least give the folks that have put up with this much boredom, one key takeaway that they can think about within their own business. And what I would say is that, this is a good example of why you shouldn't pursue growth at all costs. We've talked about other chains like Subway, where the founder, Fred DeLuca, just had a store count growth at all costs, which often led to sacrificing the quality of the stores, the ingredients, the food, etc., etc. And that's the exact opposite of In-N-Out. In-N-Out has been very strategic in their growth, and they haven't gone public because they thought that the pressure to grow would be too great and the quality would decline. And you might think because of that, the current owner, Lindsay Snyder, isn't doing too well. Well, she's doing all right. She's actually a billionaire. So if you can become a billionaire without having to go public, without having all these pressures to expand to every state overnight, I think it's a very interesting story as a counterpoint to this growth at all costs mindset, that you can still grow your company and make it very profitable if you grow in a smart way as opposed to just focusing on top line growth. One thing to keep in mind as you think about how you want to grow your company. What do you think though? What's your favorite brand? Is In-N-Out up there? Or do you like, maybe you're from the Texas area and you like Whataburger? Or, another, two popular ones in Kansas City besides Whataburger are Shake Shack, or the other one, Five Guys. What's your favorite? I don't think I'm gonna get too many people that say, McDonald's is their favorite hamburger, might be favorite for their kids, but I certainly think that maybe an In-N-Out or one of those others would be your favorite, but let me know. I'd be interested to hear.